so thank you everyone so much for joining us this afternoon. We're really excited to launch the second year of the Freshwater Stewardship Community webinar series today with Rosmarie. And if you aren't already familiar with either of us, these are the two people that are going to be with you today. Rosmarie is our presenter from Helping Nature Heal, and my name is Monica. I'm the Communications and Fundraising Coordinator at Watersheds Canada. If you have any questions during the call today, if you have any technological problems, you can send me a private message or just drop it in the chat. And if you have any questions for Rosmarie, we will be having a designated question and answer period at the end of the call. So you can drop those in the chat or save your question until the very end. So about the Freshwater Stewardship Community, I know we have a number of new people to the community on today's call. So this was a program that was initiated by Watersheds Canada, who I'll tell you about in a second. And this was in response to the pandemic and having to move all of our programming online. And so we were able to launch this last year and had over 1,000 members join our community in the first year from across 7 countries, which was a phenomenal success. We hosted 12 webinars and also had 10 handouts that accompanied those webinars. And we would like to acknowledge the funding support for the 2022 year of the community, which is from the Peterborough KM Hunter Foundation and the SM Blair Family Foundation. If you are interested in learning about any of the past webinars, watching them, or accessing those handouts, you can do so by visiting watersheds.ca/freshwater-stewardship. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Watersheds Canada, we are a national nonprofit and charitable organization based in Perth, Ontario, which is about an hour from Ottawa. We focus on working with communities across the country to restore and protect our lakes, rivers, and shorelines. And I just have 3 quick examples on the screen today of some of the programs that we run. So on the right, you can see our Natural Edge Shoreline Naturalization Program, where we plant native species along shorelines to help protect the stability of the shoreline and some of the things that Rosmarie is going to be talking about today. So I won't spoil that one. On the top left, we have our Love Your Lake program, which is a shoreline assessment and education program where we're providing property-specific reports to waterfront property owners and going through different aspects of their property in ways that they can make it more environmentally friendly. And then in the bottom left, you can see one of our fish habitat restoration programs. So this is a trout spawning bed that we are restoring. So we're putting new gravel on the snow, which we did earlier this week. And that way, when the ice is melting in the spring, the spawning bed will be restored with some new rock. So lots of different programs that you can learn about at our website at watersheds.ca. So I'd like to introduce our speaker, Rosmarie. She is the president and CEO of Helping Nature Heal Incorporated, which is an award-winning ecological restoration company based in Nova Scotia. She has been building nature-based erosion mitigation strategies in the Atlantic provinces since 2001, where she has taken trainings in both Canada and the US for many years and has created her own unique methods adapted to the Canadian climate. Rosmarie has been teaching her methods to homeowners and special interest groups since 2019 through Helping Nature Heal's Shore Up program. And we're very honored to have Rosmarie with us today for our first webinar of the year. So I will pass it over to you, Rosmarie.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'll just reshare my screen here. Yeah. Is it this one or? Whoops, sorry. Okay, well, thanks so much. This is a wonderful opportunity for me to share some of our methods and techniques that we've been employing over these number of years. And I'm really super excited to be here, and thanks so much for inviting me. And I look forward to all your questions and helping you out with very specific details at the end of our session here. All right, so here's just some of our bullet points about our company. As Monica said, I started the company in 2001, and by early 2014, I had won this coastal zone management award for our work on the coastal zone and strategizing, innovating different ideas from the landscape level, from the homeowner level. And that was, I was quite happy to acknowledge that award. And then a few years later, these awards coming out of Ottawa from the Canadian Museum of Nature. So that was really lovely. And just recently, we've been given 2 awards for 2 parks that we built, one in Coquin, New Brunswick, as well as one in the Petite Riviere area here in Nova Scotia. And our methods had been studied by one of our staff back in 2017 to 19. She did her master's thesis studying our work on the shoreline, and it's just recently been published by the Engineering magazine. So I'd encourage you to check out that link and have a good read of our work. And of course, if you want more information, to touch base throughout the process here. Excellent. So most people know the word riparian zone, and they're maybe fully engaged in understanding about this very special place. And so I thought I'd just put a really sort of simple schematic here to help you kind of understand what we're focusing on today. And of course, where we're trying to protect our waterways and our water quality, we want to really make sure that we have plenty of vegetation in that riparian zone, that sort of living ribbon, that buffer zone between the dry land and the wet spaces. This riparian zone is often called the ribbon of life, and it's really a very beautiful place where there's, I tend to call it sort of a collision of 2 worlds, right? We have the upland, the dry critters and plants acquiescing with these plants from the littoral or the wet area. And it's so diverse and quite special, and in some cases very fragile, especially during our coastal erosion that we're seeing through climate change and sea level rise. And it really does deserve a special attention, whether we're on lakes, rivers, or ocean front, to really give this place some time, energy, and hopefully some budget to do some work in these areas. And today I'm going to help you kind of see this in maybe a new light, through a new lens, and give you some tips and ideas of things that you can do pretty easily. Of course, the reasons that we want to do this are vast, and not only about water quality, but also about all the things that affect water quality and the critters that live in that area. Overheating our edges is really dangerous, because not only does the water heat up, but then it dissuades all of our critter activity from staying there. If their babies are going to be overheated in especially our July and August drought season, they're not going to stick around. And we really need that critter interaction for seed dispersal, for keeping the poop loop healthy and alive, getting that soil food web really engaged with different types of manures and debris that the critters help bring into our spaces. So really want to think of this and think of the upstream and downstream effects of all the things that happen in this area, and take a look at how we can really change some of our traditional habits and make this a much healthier, happier place for everybody, including us and the critters and all the flora and fauna that wants to live there. I guess it's really valuable to look at what some unhealthy riparian zones look like. It's pretty obvious when you look at the bottom left slide, when you see these sloughing off and gouging out of edges. You know, it's pretty easy to think of that as an unhealthy space. It's wounded, damaged land. What I always find interesting about this photograph is how this field is being mowed right to the edge. And that's where the damage is. And it correlates with the lack of vegetation. When we look deeper into this photograph, we see that full forest engaged right to the water's edge. You know, there's trees and shrubs leaning over the edge, shading the water, providing for that temperature control. The root systems of those plants are holding that soil into space and really making that a really healthy zone. And then just this simple act of mowing is really, really contributing to the destruction and the wound of this really fragile location here. When we look at the upper right-hand side, people might think that that's, you know, a sample or an example of a healthy space. It doesn't see the same kind of wounding. There's plants in there, but really it is quite unhealthy in the fact that those critters that live in that intertidal zone or that space between the water and the land, they really need that shoreline in order to provide everything for their young. And with having that rock work in place with no plants engaged in between the cracks and crevices or drooping over top of that rock wall, it really does become unhealthy. And so there's many ways that we can secure our landscapes if needed with rock, but then also engaging the plant community to make that a healthier spot. And we'll look at some of those as we move through the slides. I also wanted to point out a few things here. The lawn is being mowed right to the top of that rock wall. We see a few little perennials kind of popped in there for show. There's maybe 6 or 8 little plants in there, but otherwise it's being mowed right to the edge. There's some hardening of the upland with some patio slabs. It looks like maybe that's where people walk down and get their kayaks or things into the water. There's a shed right there and some hardened edges just beyond that shed. Also, there's drain pipes that are putting water over the edge as well. So all of those things really do contribute to the rate of erosion, to the capacity for the land to support the animals and the plant life that's really needed for a real biodiverse, healthy ecosystem. And of course, the mowing is one of the banes of my existence, I say. And sometimes, you know, if we could just get people to stop mowing everything, we would actually see those plants come into activation and be able to do some work for us on our behalf. So unhealthy can look different in different scenarios. And I would just encourage you to start looking around your neighborhoods and your waterways and seeing, you know, where are some opportunities to really re-engage health and bring it back to a much happier existence. When we look at unhealthy shorelines, we also are thinking about distribution of water, how water flows over the shoreline or over the land into the creeks and rivers and lakes and ocean, and how much displacement of all of that potential is really lost. And things like having big gaps in the canopy allow for the rain to fall directly on the soil. And if there aren't really you know, plant communities there that have tenacity or even diverse canopies within themselves, you know, different grasses, different perennials, shrubs, and trees, then the rain can really start drilling into the landscape. And as you can see here below that rain flow arrow, there's a V-shaped gap in the land, and the water, you know, gets in there, splashes sediment out, and really drills down, creating these big crevasses where in our climate, at least with our seasonality, once that water gets in there and then we have freeze thaw cycles, big chunks of our land can just rip right out with the force of that freezing water. And then as it goes through those expansions and then back into liquid form, you know, it finds its way down even deeper into deeper crevices. And so we do get quite a bit of damage on our shorelines because of the lack of vegetation and the allowance of that water to drill into the land. Overland flow, of course, is something that we all recognize, and we often think about the grass as being a green space. And I often ask people, well, you know, it may look green, it might have some of those qualities of the green layer that we want, but because of our habits to maintain that lawn, the weekly mowing, the weight of the lawnmower, the weight of ourselves pushing or riding that lawnmower, and the consistency of that activity. Most of us, who have lawns, we mow them 7 to 10 days for probably the lifespan of us owning that landscape, which a normal mortgage is around 25 to 30 years. So if we do even just simple math and think about the weight of the lawnmower and the human, the consistency of 7 to 10 days for over 30 years, just imagine how much compaction that activity has created. The consistency of that little bit of weight over and over time really does squeeze out all the air and all the capillary action that might be available in a healthy soil system, and really does change it to something that is unhealthy. So then we get overland flow. We get sheets of water just running off of our lawns. And especially if we're in a sloped surface, when it gets to the edges, it really does damage down at the bottom. And I often use the spilled milk analogy with people. When you spill a glass of milk on the water on your table, it doesn't just roll to the edge and drip straight down, right? It often goes underneath the lip of the table and then also drips down. And if you have a tablecloth, it absorbs into that cloth, and then later it forms these drips, right? Once it's hit its carrying capacity. So I think of the tablecloth as that green layer, that vegetation cover. And so as it's gone underneath and washed away some of the sediment, and the wind has gone in there, and also turbulence has removed some sediment, now we have this sod blanket, which is left to drip. And that consistent dripping creates these rills and gullies that can really exacerbate the rate of erosion. So when we think about, vegetating these edges, this buffer zone becomes even more important if we want to hold on to our land and not be at the loss of literally acreage over the time frame of owning a piece of land given 25 or 30 years. Now, with climate change, of course, those numbers and that rate is exacerbated. So, we really want to be owning land. That's an investment that we want to inherit out to our children or our grandchildren. And if we don't take some of these things into play and enact now, well, we have time, energy, and money to do so, then it's going to be too late at some point. Climate change will catch up with that loss, and it can be very devastating for people. There's a small little schematic there in the upper left-hand corner that when we have this disturbed or fragmented canopy, we have a 30% rate of evaporation. About 55% of the water is actually running off due to overland flow. And we have a meager 15% infiltration rate, which is really sad. We need the root systems and the diversity of root systems to really draw that water deep into the land and help keep our soils healthy. What this leads to, of course, is that we get algae blooms in our lake. We have, I know in our area, there's definitely times during the summer where we're not allowed to swim in some of our lakes because of algae and, pollutants or things like swimmer's itch and, issues for pets and things being in the water. So we really do want to protect this water. Also, the vertical parts of those plants help to slow the progress of pollutants such as debris like plastics and plastic bags, plastic water bottles, oils and spills and things from actually getting into the water. So the vertical parts of our plants, the above ground parts, do such a great job at slowing the progress of that into our waterways that it's way easier to pick up garbage and things that have blown in from the neighborhood when they're tangled up in the plant material before they actually get into the water and sink and then disappear from sight that we don't even realize they're there. So we want to really look at this plant community as doing work for us. and really helping us to be able to stay and live in these areas, but also to create spaces, greenways, and spaces for the animals that we rely on, for beauty and interest and really some social time, right? We're talking to the animals through the windows, watching them at the bird feeders and things like that. Those will all disappear if we don't have that that plant community there to help us along. So here's how we develop a really healthy ecosystem. So we try to close the canopy. When we do that, we are bouncing off the rain and the snow load that comes down and really taking up some of that energy that is coming from the falling from the sky. So we know that raindrops fall at a, 22, I think it is, miles per hour, something like that. So if a tree canopy is the first line of defense, and then those raindrops drop from side to side. They land on understory trees, on shrubberies, all the way down to perennials and grasses and ground covers, rather than straight onto open soil. The rate of velocity is diminished greatly, and all of that energy is sort of used up and taken up in the plant community. So the plants are doing all this really great work for us. And then our soils are super healthy with all the diversity of root systems below them and all the soil food web critters that are connected to each and every one of those diverse root systems. So the greater the diversity, the more impact we have in slowing down the rate of erosion, but also increasing the rate of infiltration. Look at that, 50% infiltration. If all we did was replant our buffer zones and slow down the mowing, we can slow down those rates of erosion by 50% or more. Isn't that wonderful? We slow down the rate of runoff extremely. Only 10% is our average. And then we have a 40% evaporation rate, which of course our plants are expressing, breathing out water and oxygen for us to be able to breathe. So that evaporation rate does go up with more plants in a good way, right? We allow that humidity, that water to get back into the cycle in a more gentle and succinct way, rather than, just evaporating into the ethers and not actually being put to use. We do really encourage people to replant their slopes, replant their buffer zone, that riparian edge, all the way from the water, from the toe of the slope, all the way up into our human spaces. So we ask people, do you really need to mow all of this land? Could it be that you mow pathways, to the boathouse or to the edge, to the swimming hole, whatever the activities are in your landscape? I often say, what's socially acceptable for you and your family? For some people, they don't need any lawn. They don't have pets or grandchildren to think about playing ball with or frisbee or whatnot. And instead convert that lawn to meadows, grasslands, shrub layers, and really get a huge more interest and inviting space that really draws you back out into the landscape and creates these really interesting spaces. When we do that, we find that the connection from the human to nature is deepened, and we become stewards of these places rather than just owners, and rather than dominating the landscape and not letting those plants mature, go to seed, and allow themselves to regenerate in their natural processes. When we are mowing, that's what we're doing, right? We're kind of holding this place in suspended animation, never letting a grass go to seed, always mowing it every week. And so what a shame for the grass plants, right? They never get to actually birth their own seed stock and replenish and create new little rootlings. And that's really a shame for all the critters and all of us connected to that land. When we can step back a little and become stewards of a place and allow things to come to fruition, allow the critter activity to come back into our land, it really does benefit all of us in all of these really dynamic and special ways. We do this through what we call the ecosystem triangle. So we look how Mother Nature rebirths a landscape, once it's been damaged. I'm sure you're all aware of clear cuts and development and all kinds of tragedies that we impose on nature. And when we step away from those tragedies and ignore the place for a while, we see that nature does have a natural path, a natural system of succession to regain its health and regain its vitality. And it does this through successional paths. And we can actually notice where in succession is the landscape currently. Is it being held in suspended animation through mowing and other activities? Is it being harmed deeply by development and excavation of soils and movement of gross amounts of material because we're building a house or our cottage or whatever kind of development should happen? How are we harming the place can help us to remember what used to be there and how we can get back to a sense of health. And we do this through what we call the ecosystem triangle. So generally what we do is look for the largest canopy plants that have remained beyond those damages. So there might be one big tree left on the property, or there might be nothing, right? It might have been cleared right to the boundary lines. Well, hopefully there are boundary lines that still have big trees involved. So we can imagine a new ecosystem being drawn out from that boundary, from that sole tree in the lawn that's being surrounded by grass. We can think of that as the pinnacle or the, kind of the height of our canopy of this triangle. And then we can start embedding its partners, its companion plants, the guild plants that it loves to live with. And we can be creative with that in certain ways. We can focus entirely on native species. We can bring in some of our heritage plants. We can even bring in some of the ornamentals if we wish. But we do this in a layered sort of fashion, mimicking how nature would do it naturally. So we bring in other canopy trees, small trees, large shrubs, small shrubs and ground covers, perennials and grasses. We mix them up and we put them in what we call plant recipes in particular arrangements and densities so that we can not only improve the above ground part, but we can also think about what's going on underneath us and can we engage those root systems and the soil food web to really do some more work for us, to really replenish the nourishment of the soils, especially if we want to eat those plants or if we want to make medicine or tinctures or use them as crafts. We really need them to be as vital and abundant and robust as they possibly can be so that we're getting the best out of them. And so that really does start with what's going on below the ground. And when we really take notice of the diversity of root systems underneath us, we can actually put them in a recipe or in a designed fashion to really do that good work for us. And we'll look at some of those as we move along. Of course, we're talking about stormwater management today, and all of this sciencey stuff gets wrapped up into how we actually see it on the landscape. And here's some really simple strategies that you can do today. Of course, this is just the tip of the iceberg, and I'll show you some more maybe technical ideas throughout this presentation. And I would really engage with you if you wanted to call and have some site-specific details given to you. So curving pathways rather than mowing in straight lines is really one of the simplest things you could do. I mean, probably not today because we're covered in snow, but come spring, you might just decide to mow less. Maybe mow in circles around your property instead of in squares and long lines. You can imagine when we mow in long lines, especially if we do it the same way each time, we end up with these little divots, right? These little swales that have been embedded over time into the lawn. And water can, it's a free way for water to just run through those lines and spill off into the edges and erode our landscape. And as we're having more and more storms, due to climate change, this is becoming more and more of a problem. If we mow in circles, then the water gets held in space, and rather than washing away, it gets held there. Now, that also can contribute to sinkholes. So we want to add the appropriate plants to help nourish and hold that soil system together so we don't get the sinkholes. Sinkholes are one way that we engage homeowners to see if they are experiencing stormwater management issues that contribute to erosion. So we'll want to keep that in mind. We also want to leave these buffer zones. We ask for 5 to 15 meters from the edge of whatever waterway you happen to be on. If you can just stop mowing there, that's great. If you turn it into a meadow with beautiful perennials and diversity of grasses, that's even better. If you add shrubberies and things that might produce fruits and nuts and pollen for all of our critters in the area. Of course, we want to engage all of those pollinator species, especially if we want to eat from our landscape. Some of the other things we can do are create rain gardens, which is a really wonderful way of taking water off of our roof and kind of concentrating it in a certain area with plants and with structure so that it does good work for us. Rain barrels, cisterns, eaves trough, downspouts, permeable surface, all of these things contribute to a really healthy landscape and can be designed and tweaked to create these wonderful rain garden landscapes. And of course, appropriate plants in the right place, right? If we're talking lots of water in soaking wet soils, then we need plants that really like to live there. Otherwise, we're going to be wasting some of our investment, and plants that want dry spaces and well-drained areas are going to perish. So we want to really make sure we do our research on right plant, right place. Here's a lovely schematic from the city of Calgary that I've borrowed, and it shows a healthy landscape here. And you know, I often wonder about when we're designing and building our homes with these massive roof systems, you know, if they're not putting solar on there, then it's really just a catchment for water. You know, having a greater purpose like solar is really great. And I get that you need to have a big roof system in order to be able to have all that infrastructure hanging out up there. But if you're not doing solar, then having a large roof is really challenging for the environment because it's a heat sink, especially if you have asphalt shingles or black metal roof. So that contributes to the heat of your landscape. And especially during our droughts and things, they can get super hot and absorb all that heat. And then our plants, you know, are basically cooking in our landscapes. So we want to be careful about that. But it is an opportunity, if we have a large roof, to catch a whole lot of water. And so you can see here that we have eaves trough on all edges of the roof, as well as downspouts. And on that left-hand side, we see that, you know, they've got one rain barrel there. Now, we often find that one rain barrel isn't enough. So we stack multiple rain barrels side by each, and you link them together with piping. And there's some really simple ways of doing that. Another way is to have your downspout flow into a garden bed to create a rain garden so that the water is being used up by plants that actually like a lot of water. The other way would be to sink a cistern into your infrastructure so that a cistern is really just a big box that water gets holed in. And then that can actually be connected to your household systems. So you can use that for toilet flushing, for hand washing, things like that. So it can contribute to your resources within your land. When we have all this water landing on our lawn and it's sheeting off of our landscape or off of our driveway, it's going into the storm sewer system. And often those systems are directly flowing into our waterways. So we really don't want to be, you know, washing the car in our driveway with, you know, chemicals and putting lots of fertilizer and chemicals onto our lawns, and then having that water just wash right into our waterways. It's really detrimental to the livelihood of our critters, as well as the downstream effects of other people using that water for swimming and recreation. So we want to really make sure that we're being responsible citizens and that we do as best as we can with the capacity that we have. Of course, everything is time, energy, and money. So we have to look at that sustainability and figure out where we can really do the best work. So this drawing is something that I often encourage people to kind of clip out and put it on their fridge. And when spring comes around, have a look around your home or your cottage, your landscape, and see how you can tweak your landscape a little bit to really use up some of these things. Some of the other things that I notice here is that there's vegetation right underneath the portico, the entryway into this home. So rather than it going into an eaves trough, it's landing on those plants and they're using up that water as well. So take a good look at that and think about how you might be able to tweak some of the systems in your place. Going to just dive into the rain garden a little bit deeper here. We want to keep the rain gardens minimum 10 feet away from your home. Most of our homes have drainage or weeping tile around the foundations. A lot of the new homes are built on slabs that may not have drainage embedded within their structures. And so we don't want to get a lot of water leaching in underneath those slabs and then causing frost heave, which can, crack your drywall and your windows and all sorts of damage. So at least 10 feet away from your home, making sure that you don't use really critically invasive root systems like willows and dogwoods and alders within your rain garden and its proximity to the home. So you really want to investigate those plants and make sure that you've got the right root systems in the right place and keeping that far away from the house. We've heard a lot about willow getting into people's basements and around their septic fields and that kind of thing. So not to give willow a bad name, it's a great plant used in the right location, but in the wrong location, you'll definitely feel the pain on that. So be careful about that. Also, there's some infrastructure here that wasn't mentioned in the previous slide about a perforated pipe and an outlet and potentially an overflow, especially now that we have climate change and we have these really aggressive storms, especially here on the coastal communities where we've, in the last month, we've had, so much rain, more rain than we've ever had in the winter time. And we have storms throughout the typical storm season that are dropping more rain than a year's worth of rain in some areas. So we really want to make sure that we build these beautiful gardens, but then we also have a mode of egress so that that water has a way to get out if it does overflow or, beyond its capacity. So we really want to make sure that there is a mode of egress, whether that's a drip line that you attach or a perforated pipe, whether that's below or at the capacity line somewhere on the slope of your rain garden, and you allow for it to get out of the way. And in that case, then it does get into the storm system, and hopefully that doesn't happen too often. We want to make sure that, the drainage can get into a natural space, if at all possible, into the forest edge of your property rather than over the slope. When we see these drain pipes from basements coming out through the slope, especially on the ocean front and the lakefront properties, with aggressive water and rain coming down, those pipes become, these big flows that is concentrated with a lot of energy. And as it's spewing out into the lake, which, the contractor thinks that's a great idea to get the water back to where it needs to be, but it has to pass through the soil horizon and often down a slope or down an edge, and it can take sediments with it, contributing to, sedimentation of the waterway, which, disturbs our spawning fishes and the light penetration of the water and turbidity of that. So really important that we take a really holistic look at the whole scenario and really design it appropriately so that we don't cause any of these unintentionally, of course, but we don't cause damage further afield. This is the Kokan Marina in Kokan, New Brunswick that we planted this year. And this park actually just won one of these Greener Green Spaces awards. And you can see here we have a pea gravel path basically for the water to flow through. This used to be just a ditch that went from parking area underground in a culvert and then opened up and just spewed along this this fenceway, which has a park on one side and just a mowed space on the other side. So it was just water that was just coming off parking. It probably had, you know, fuel and effluents in it and garbage and all kinds of things. And it was just spewing back into the waterway. This is a highly damaged area. It's a marina. And so we have multi-year projects planned and ideas for kind of re-greening this space in its entirety. And this is sort of step one, this little park that we built last summer. You can see that there's curvaceousness to this pathway of water now rather than just a freeway. So we're taking the water on a bit of a journey. We've also dug deeper zones through the center and created that curved path so it slows it down. We then filled it with pea gravel and we planted appropriate plants along the way. So we have things like irises and rushes, and of course a few beautiful perennials like echinacea and daisies and black-eyed Susans. And at the outflow end, you can just sort of see it there. We have a double layer of geotextile with hay bales in the middle. And after this photo was taken, we've actually put a wattle fence surrounding that infrastructure. So as the water enters that final stage before it gets into the waterway again, it has to flow through the geotextile. Well, firstly, through the wattle fence. So we'll capture, you know, any plastic bottles or any big garbage that finds its way through the system that hasn't already been tangled up in the plant community. It'll certainly get tangled up in that wattle fence and we'll be able to take care of it and dispose of it properly. So the wattle fence, the geotextile, hay bales, which will decompose over time, so they'll need to be replaced from time to time, another layer of geotextile and another wattle fence. And just beyond the wattle fence, on the water side in that rock wall, we have embedded ocean-loving grasses, saltwater grasses, as well as willows, dogwoods, and alders. So as that plant community grows up out of the rock wall system, it'll create our final buffer to the waterway. So there should be pretty clean water without a whole lot of mess going into that waterway, which we're really happy to have been able to build that. You can also see that we created a buffer zone along the waterway, so you don't even see the rock wall anymore from this perspective. A variety of pollinator species, meadow plants, diversity of grasses and perennials. We have wood chip trails going through that location now so people can observe and take time to enjoy this infrastructure. And there's a little sitting area and some spaces for wheelchair access and a whole host of diversity. If you want more information about that park and the wonderful group that helped us design and build it, as well as the award, you can hit our Facebook page or our website. And of course, this is one of my favorite plant recipes. So native iris, marsh plants, grasses and grains, bayberry, alder, willow, red osier dogwood. One of my very favorite plant recipes. Diversity of root systems in that recipe, as well as above ground parts, different heights, different berries, different strategies for habitat for the animals in the area. Plants are so helpful. I just can't impress upon you enough. And I love looking at the schematic because it gives us a really good visual on the difference between Kentucky bluegrass, our favorite lawn grass, and all of these other plants, right? Look at those different grains and grasses and perennials, how diverse those root systems are, how deep they go compared to the grass, and how widespreading and clumping they are. Some of them have trailing runner roots, so their little babies will keep popping up wherever the opportunities arise. Some of them dive down in long strands to help, get nutrients from really deep below in the base soil layers and pull those nutrients up so the other plants can really enjoy them and make use of them. And some of them are really wide and nitty and really diverse. And I really encourage you to think about your plants in this way, this more three-dimensional way, rather than just for eye candy, right? They really can produce a lot of work for us and really support our needs for healthy places to live, work, and play, as well as security, especially on slope surfaces. One of my favorites is the oak, of course, the mighty red oak. And, it takes up 200 gallons a day. Imagine, right? If we have a heavy rain, how wonderful that oak is saying, thank you for all this water to feed me and my saplings and my seedlings and all my seed stock. But the work that they're doing, these guys are really tough nuts. And I'm so glad to know them so intimately and be able to make use of them in such wonderful, robust ways. And then, of course, Rosa virginiana, one of our native roses. And doesn't she have a tangly mess of roots, right? I often think of our children with long hair that's all got gum in it and knots and things, and how wild and crazy it is. And those root systems are just that. They're wild and crazy. They run and they knit amongst the rocks and other root systems. And if you've ever had to try to transplant one of these, you know what kind of a chore it is. And 2 to 4 gallons a day of uptake. 3 feet wide, 3 feet long. What a hard worker she is. So I encourage everyone to think about adding Rosa to your landscape for sure. The grains and grasses, of course, they're not shy on their work either. They can stretch 10 feet deep. I know of some of the grasses that can go 20 feet or more deep, depending on the soil horizon. And isn't that wonderful that they can really drive deep down into that soil, pull those nutrients up, engage with all the soil food web critters, and provide wonderful security for us, food for the birds. If you want to have lots of birds and critters in your area, you just really need to plant the right ones. And here we are, 6.5 millimeters of water per day. It's great when we can think about even a nice gentle rain coming down, feeding these plants, and they actually taking up that water in several ways, not just from their roots, but also from their stems and leaves and flower petals as well, and really making the most efficient use of those resources. I wanted to talk a little bit about some more complex systems. This is a living shoreline that we work on here in the Halifax region. And you can see a really awesome line. The property line here between the two homes is pretty easy to see. The right-hand side, where it's kind of sloughing off and looks really sad, and that slope is just a mess, compared to the vegetated slope on the left-hand side. So within that left-hand side, we have these bit more complex techniques compared to the simplicity of the sort of rain garden, rain barrel systems, which are fairly simple to set up and make use of. In here, of course, these are steep slopes. So, our staff are highly trained with fall arrest and all kinds of safety. We have all kinds of safety gear that they wear when they're working on these kinds of slopes. And I don't recommend that the homeowner take these projects on without any appropriate safety training, but please be careful and, get advice from a local professional. And if you don't have one, then please reach out to us and we'll be certain to help you out. Within this vegetated buffer system on this steep slope, we have mixed in a variety of our innovative methodologies. So the wattle fence, which I mentioned earlier, we have what we call embedded hay flakes. We look at hay as big seed packages. We've got brush matting, live staking here. And then of course, we've got an upland buffer zone that has a diversity of species. The other thing I wanted to point out is that root systems have tensile strength, and we can actually, they're cataloged, we know them, and we can make use of different root systems to hold slopes like this in that are quite steep. The slope at its peak is about 30 feet high, and it's about a 80-degree angle, so it's almost straight up. And so, you have to have the right kind of plant that can latch onto that particular soil system in order to hold it all together. And of course, all of those strategies are things that we've either learned and modified from our education over these last 20 years or have created on our own. The bottom right-hand corner shows a living shoreline that is really quite healthy. It's got a really wide buffer zone in the upland. So we've turned that into a meadow. And then you can see we have, of course, woody debris and, all sorts of plants growing there. And this is on the Northumberland Strait, where we have really quite high energy impact of our wave systems. Okay, so I wanted to thank you so much for taking your time and your patience to go through the slideshow with me and for listening today. And again, I wanted to just offer up our assistance and consultation services that if you find yourself in a really tricky position where you're not sure what to do with your storm management plans, please connect with us and we're happy to help, even though we are here in Nova Scotia with this virtual world. We're really quite easy to help you out, and we have virtual site visit that we can book for you. So please do contact us if you need any help. And I think I'll just turn the floor back over to Monica, and if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to go through those. Okay, great. I'll stop sharing my screen now. So if Monica, if you wanted to come back up, we can do that. Great.
Wonderful. Well, before we get into anything else, I just want to say a big thank you to you for going through all of that amazing information. I think that's going to be so helpful to so many people here on the call. And we do have a lot of questions, but before we get to those, I just want to mention to everyone that I did drop Rosemarie's email in the chat, and we'll also be sending a follow-up email to everyone with the recording from today and some extra resources. So if you didn't catch something, didn't write it down while she was presenting, don't worry. A lot of information is coming to next week. And I'm also just putting in an anonymous survey in the chat if you would all not mind taking a few minutes just to fill in so that you can help guide our future webinars in this series. That would be very helpful for both Rosemarie and myself. And on that note of additional resources, we did prepare a 2-page handout, normally 1 page, but so much good information, it became a 2-page handout for today's webinar. So we will be sending that out to everyone as well. So you can post that to social media, or if you have a Lake Association website, we really encourage you to put that along with the recording if you think other people would be interested in the information that was shared today. And lastly, I will just say that we do have a number of resources and webinars coming up at the end of the month, the beginning of March, for Invasive Species Awareness Week. So we will be talking specifically in these webinars about earthworms and Phragmites. So both of the registrations for these webinars are now open on our website, which is where you would have all registered for today. And that's watersheds.ca/freshwater-stewardship. So we will now get to a couple questions. So we did have one about kind of going to the beginning of that presentation. You were talking about the compaction of the soil, especially from the continuous and frequent lawn mowing. So someone is just wondering how you would prepare an area for planting if it's been very compacted without causing erosion and soil loss.
Oh, that's a great question. I'm often thinking that every footstep we put on the land is causing damage to somebody else. There's some little nematode or protozoa going, help, I can't breathe. Stop stepping on me. So it's a challenge, right? How do we do this work without causing more damage? So one of the things that's really great is to not think about digging at all, but also to think about lasagna gardening or building berms. Berms are really helpful. They're elevated kind of mounds of soil. They can be any shape or any width. And what we often do is decide what shape and size it's going to be. Cut an edge. If we're all gardeners, we know about the edging tool, and we flip a little 4-inch edge that's about 6 inches deep. We take that soil and flip it into the interior of what our berm would look like. If we're doing lasagna gardening, that's layers of cardboard and soils and seaweeds, and then planting in there, adding mulch on top. If we're building berms, then we're adding soils on top. So I tend to not dig the soil very much because we don't want to disturb what's going on under there, but rather add layers on top and then plant appropriate plants in the berm so that those root systems do the work of loosening up the soils below. And that way we're not causing additional damage. That little ditch that we put around our spaces or on the outer edge helps for the lawnmower guy to kind of know where to stop mowing so he doesn't run over our installation. But it's also a trap for water, and it can hold our mulch layer, right? So it doesn't spill off into the lawn. So you end up having your lawn and then this little ditch and a berm that comes out of it. So it becomes much more three-dimensional. And in berm building, we now have 3 surfaces to plant on rather than just a horizontal plane. So we have the sloped edge, the top, and then the back slope. So you can really get way more plants into a berm. And if you think about square foot gardening, you can really, quadruple your output of planting in there. If you have a lawn that's been traditionally mowed and typically in a square or whatever shape your land is, if you simply round out the corners and let them go wild on their own, usually there's some really cool stuff growing in our lawns that we haven't paid attention to. There could be wild strawberries and hawkweed and daisies and some other grains and grasses in there that have been kind of just held in that suspended animation for years. So sometimes it's fun just to stop mowing and, whether that's in an interesting shape or just in a circle so our corners grow back in, and just observe for a while and see what's happening. Let the nature kind of speak to you before you jump in and start building things. Just taking time to rest and reflect before you dig in. That also gives you time to plan and do some research and look at root systems and what kind of plants will really best suit that location. I hope that was helpful.
For sure. So one of the slides you showed, one of the examples, I think you had mentioned that it won an award with the different paths and the fence to stop the pollution from going in the water. Someone's just wondering about what's going on the other bank. So it was a heavy rock face, and she's just wondering what's going on there, and also how someone would maybe improve that if they have that, I guess, maybe on their own property or in their community, what could be done.
Sure. Yeah. So on the opposite bank in that photograph, this is a marina situation. So they've built a breakwater that is like a big peninsula that sticks out into the water flow. So that's what you're looking at on the opposite side of that park. And so our hope and what we what we tend to do, maybe not at this park, we'll see if it gets approval or whatnot, but when we have a really barren rock installation like that, again, contributing to the heat sink, the heating up of waterways and such, which we all know is so problematic. So what we do is what we call a vegetated rock wall system. So depending on how the rock wall has been built, if there's drainage rock in behind it, if there's geotextile in there, how deep all of that rock is, if there's soil in there at all, and the capacity to grow plants, then we take that advantage and we start planting in it. Now there's rocks, are side by each. There's always a cavity in between the boulders and the rocks. And sometimes even if you look inside the rock wall, it can go in quite deep, these long cavities. So we do a variety of different measures. Sometimes we are rock wall stuffing with hay and leaf litter and maybe brush to create a nature sandwich over top of the rock system. We allow that to decompose for a year or two, and then we might add soils and plants. If we know that there's soil in behind the rock wall, we might penetrate through those cracks and crevices with metal rebar. And we do this great thing where we spin it in a circle so it creates a V shape. And then as we pull that rebar out, we insert either a live stake with roots on it or a fresh cut stake that will root up over time. So live stakes are often made of different types of willow, alders, and sometimes roses. They're actually just live sticks that either have roots or will root up shortly. So as we penetrate through the rock wall, we kind of inoculate the system with these root systems and allow for those plants to emerge and actually grow right out and right through the rock wall. It depends on the rock system, of course, and what's going on in your landscape. There's a couple different strategies there that I mentioned. And if you wanted to, send me some photos or something, I could give you some site-specific advice.
Wonderful. So I think we'll stop it there just because we are at 2 o'clock. I know there are some questions that are in the chat, and what I'll do is I'll pass those on to Rosmarie and we can answer those and also put the answers in that said email that's going out to all of you. So you'll get the answers, but just to be respectful of everyone's time, we will stop it there. So again, thank you so much, Rosmarie, for joining us today for this wonderful wealth of knowledge and for your invitation for people to reach out to you. And we will be following up with everyone later next week with the recording, many different resources available to you as we all look forward to spring and how we can implement some of these techniques on our own properties.
Excellent. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great weekend.